I held a contest. Whoever guessed my favorite king in the Viking Age was going to get to pick the subject for the next video, and we have a winner here, Marcus. A few of you guessed my favorite king was Haakon the Good. A few of you were right, but Marcus was first, and he wanted to hear about the Viking diet and training and also the sports they played. These are all great subjects that I was gonna do videos on anyway, because we can learn a lot from it. So I'm just doing a little intro to the sources on the question now. The bad news is there are not many written sources of these types of things, of course. These types of things are not what people write down and record over the ages. The poems, the sagas about heroes and battles and kings and wars that they won, those are the kinds of stories that people tell. They don't tell about the diet and training of the soldiers, unfortunately. And this is totally normal. In 1,000 years from now, they are going to have lots of records of the championships that Michael Jordan won or Muhammad Ali, but they're not going to really have any preserved records of how the Chicago Bulls were eating and training, something like that. So these types of things are pretty normal, but we do have a few written sources and archaeological finds that give some evidence, and I'm going to break some of that down in this video. We just have to use our brains a little bit to piece things together. Number one, the diet. So again, here the sources don't say much. The only written sources that go into detail is the blods, of course, the sacrifices, which animals are sacrificed and what is eaten at the sacred times of year. So you can see here what animals would have been eaten at different times, at different blods, along with the source here. I did a full video on that, but for now, just quickly, the animals in general that take a lot of maintenance, like cattle and sheep, most of them would be slaughtered at the start of winter and then eaten then. That's also like today, honestly. During the winter, it would be more pork and goats, who are very easy to take care of and keep alive through the winter. Very low maintenance. Also, don't forget that horse meat was a major part of the diet and one of the two most important pagan practices that pagans actually wanted to still be allowed when Christianity came in. So meat in general was a big part of the diet. A lot of people aren't going to like that, but it's true. We have a clear, reliable source from ancient Rome, actually, speaking about this too. That the diet was primarily meat and dairy. So this is about 600 years before the Viking Age, but this was a time where all of us Germanic tribes were one people in the north of Europe. All of these Germanic tribes had this diet for ages, probably. It's not rocket science, you know, if nature doesn't have a lot of agriculture, if things don't grow year-round, the diet is going to be more based on meat and dairy and wild foraged plants and things like that, hunter-gatherer type diet. The sources, we can say, also speak about alcohol, of course. This pops up many, many times in the sagas, especially around the winter time. Scandinavians drank a shitload. Were they alcoholics? Maybe. But more importantly, you have to remember alcohol is one of the easiest it is the easiest thing by far to preserve over long periods of time. They didn't have refrigerators and freezers, so when the winter came and nothing else was growing, they had some things that could be preserved, but these things took up a lot of space and used valuable preservatives that they had. But alcohol is really the only thing that doesn't need to be preserved. The longer it just sits there, the better. And of course, this is the winter time. They weren't gonna be drunks the whole year round. They had things to do in the summer. So mostly wintertime would be a time for lots of drinking. And of course, you know, the sources mention hunting and fishing in the winter, at all times of year really, but especially the winter. So lots of wild fish and wild animals in the diet. And that's about all the sources will tell us. We can look at some of the archaeological finds. The problem is, you all know archaeologists have an agenda. Many of them, not all, but many of them do. Look, if you find a preserved skeleton with food fragments in its teeth, or seeds in the grave, or sometimes even a corpse that has been preserved in a bog or in a glacier for thousands of years, you can actually see the stomach contents, and it can tell us what that person ate. what that person ate at the time they died, that is. People forget this. So, of course, a Scandinavian 1,000 years ago, if he died in the summer, his stomach is going to be mostly full of fruits and vegetables, and that's what you will find in archaeology. But if the person died in the winter, it's going to be mostly meat, dairy, alcohol, and whatever other things that they could preserve. Scandinavia is not like tropical places in the world where food is growing year-round and they can eat whatever they want. Scandinavia in the Viking Age and before, you're eating whatever's there, okay? So, like I mentioned, winter would be mostly meat, pork, wild game, eggs, milk, cheese, those kinds of things, alcohol, also grains. When we did start farming and using grains for agriculture, that could be preserved pretty easily, so there would be lots of bread during the winter. Once the spring came around, any of you who have been to Scandinavia knows how it is. The first kind of berries and fruits and nuts and herbs start to come out, and wild plants. Then the middle of the summer, lots and lots of fruits. Strawberries, apples, plums, nuts, cherries. If you go for a walk in the woods in Norway any time of year, you're probably going to come across all of these things. It's really beautiful, and actually you can probably survive in the summertime just on those things alone if you really wanted to. You're also working a lot harder in the summer and losing some water and sugar through the sweat. So yeah, lots of fruits and sugar towards the summer, midsummer time. And it really wouldn't make much sense to eat your animals at this time, so you just have taken care of all of them pretty much throughout the whole winter, used valuable resources to keep your animals alive, but now you can just set them free to graze and they take care of themselves for a few months. And you want to keep them alive for when you actually need them in the winter, so they probably ate very little meat in the summer. Then comes the fall, and that is a feast. Not just for a weekend, but probably for a good straight 1 or 2 months. They would be eating like a fat ass. All the vegetables were being harvested at this time. The animals were brought in from the graze. All that stuff, that's not going to last the winter, so they would be eating as much as they could before the winter came, but of course making sure that they had enough preserved to last the winter. Also fall time, Scandinavia is filled with mushrooms, really nice mushrooms in the woods at this time too. So people would be absolutely pigs on this time of year, put on about 10 kilos, save some fat for the winter when food would be more scarce. That's all I'll say on the diet. I'll do more videos on it, but you can kind of decide for yourself if you want to eat like a Viking today. Eat the things that are in season and think about, what would have been available to them at certain times of year. It's pretty easy. Then we get into the sports. So I'm just going to list out a few here that we have records of. Some of our heroes from the sagas and even the gods doing these sports regularly. Horse riding, archery, spear throwing, running, swimming, swimming like in a race, but also we have a couple records of swimming like trying to drown each other, like holding each other down under the water for longer than the other. Pretty dangerous there. Of course, we have skiing and things like that. Wrestling, as it was called, glima. So some of you like glima, do you? Well, check this out. Boom! My online shop is all clothing focused on glima. Norse wrestling, these symbols here were put in the shoes to give good luck in the wrestling matches back in the days. We also have some awesome t-shirt designs and much more coming there, super cool things if there's any grapplers watching. I'll also do a lot more videos on glima, but for now, Norse sports, we can finish by saying that they were mostly individual sports. We have one team sport on record, and that was just called ball games. But we actually don't know a lot about it. Some of the scholars have suggested that it was kind of like an early version of hockey. I'm sure they also had rowing as a team sport, but we just don't have that many records of a set competition with two sides. But of course they rowed, and of course they did other team sports like that. We also find other games mentioned, the famous Hevnataffel, that was spoken about and found in some archaeological digs. They also had a few other board games that they also called Taffel. Skåktaffel is actually the name for chess. They also had dice games, casting lots, and these were probably very important judging on the archaeological finds and when they come up. We also have Roman records a lot before the Viking Age saying that the Germanic tribes loved to gamble. Now, I know a lot of these things don't sound like sports, but to the Norse, they were. They were all kind of lumped into same category as games. Flyting actually was considered in this category here. The famous Viking poetry where you basically talk shit to the other one, how they did, the Viking rap battles, as we may call it, Flyting. So important about sports and games before I move on. These things were viewed as entertainment. They are bored, they're getting together and want to unwind and relax and have some fun. That's when they played sports and games. Harald Hardrada is one who was even known to stop his battles in the middle of a siege, for example, to take a break from the fighting so he could play some sports with his warriors. And also, almost all kings, really, that we hear about, they were said to be good at multiple of these sports that I just listed. They were all well-rounded athletes and did these things for fun. But if you want to know who the most athletic kings were from our sources, it was probably Harald Hardrada and also Olav Tryggvason. Both of them were not very good men, or very nice men, but they were very strong warriors and great at all types of sports. So that we do have to say about them. Finishing remarks about sports in the sources. Like I said, it was viewed as something fun to enjoy and not a super competitive thing like it was in ancient Greece, for example, in the Olympics. And I'm sure the Norse got competitive with it, just because we don't have any records of it, of organized competitions, doesn't mean that they didn't do it. Of course they did it. It's humans, it's our competitive nature. If, say, I'm the best wrestler in this village, you're the best wrestler in your village, we're gonna get together, we're gonna wrestle. Oh, I beat you at wrestling, okay, let's have a swim. Okay, go. Oh, you beat me at swimming, you're a real fast swimmer. My cousin in Denmark is a really fast swimmer. He's the best in Denmark. I'll bring him here next year and we'll see who wins. We'll all swim together. Of course, these types of things happened. We just don't have any records of organized competition with sport. Different from the ancient Greeks, for example, who organized, everybody comes in from different city-states and they all compete to see who's the best. So that's all I have to say about sports for now. On to the training, the physical training. We have basically no sources on this. This is difficult. And like I said, this is normal. These aren't things that the chroniclers would write down at the time. Remember, they were writing on very limited space, on thin sheets of vellum, calfskin, very expensive, and they would not be wasting space on training programs back then. So this is the way it is in history. The only records that we really find anywhere in the world about physical training comes from Greek and Roman sources. But of course it wasn't just them training, All humans understand the idea of training at something to get better. Practice and get better. This doesn't take a rocket science. A monkey can figure that out. If he keeps hitting the rock in a certain way, he's going to figure out how to do it right. Of course humans trained. We just don't have any written sources of it in the Norse world, but there are some things we can learn. Of course, there's the games that I spoke about. Remember, they were viewed as something fun to do in your spare time, not like a serious life goal. So if you want to train like a Viking, have fun with it. Don't kill yourself with hard, boring training. We have to have some fun with these things. Do what makes you happy and be well-rounded. Have fun in playing lots of different sports and doing cross-training and things like that. Don't focus your life on one thing. It's good to get a variety. That's at least the Viking way, and many other pro athletes feel the same. Number 2 tip in all the sources that I would have to say, if a Viking was great at something, if he was very strong or a good swimmer or good at archery or horseback riding, whenever a Viking was said to be great at something, it's written like he was already great at it as a child. He was born with that ability. Any talents that a man had back then, he already showed to be good at those things very young. Today, this is quite different. We honestly have a stubborn mindset, and that's good in a way, but in a way it's bad because we are told by society that if you believe in yourself and work hard, you can achieve anything you want, and that's all a bunch of bullshit. Okay, humans are built with their own special talents. Everyone has their own special talents, and it would best benefit people to stick with what they're naturally gifted at. I was a really good football player and swimmer as a kid on all the best teams. I could have gone professional. Basketball was very popular at the time, though, so I stopped playing football and continued with basketball, which was a stupid idea because I had no natural gift at it. Even though I worked very hard, I just did not have the talent. So that's just what happens. Even now, I'm 30 and I'm doing fighting. I was a very good kickboxer, but for some reason I decided to do MMA, and I have no talent whatsoever for jiu-jitsu, so that just makes life much harder than it needs to be. If I would have stuck to my natural gifts in football as a child, I could have probably been professional and even retired by now. So that is the second piece of advice when it comes to Viking training. Stick mainly to the things that you're naturally gifted at. You know, if you're young enough or if you have kids, make sure they realize their talents when they're young. And again, make it fun for them. The Norse way of training and sports is for fun. And if you keep it fun for children when they are young, they'll continue with it as they get older instead of quitting, and hopefully they can make a good living and a life of it for themselves if they just stick with it and have fun their whole life with the sport. Then maybe a final tip for Viking training would be kind of farmer style training. Of course, most of the training back then for humans would be farm work, moving moderately, not too heavy, but moderately heavy things for long periods of time. Shoveling, lifting, throwing, pushing, pulling, those kinds of things, basic full body movements. If you guys are farmers right now, that's great, but most of us are not today. But we can incorporate this type of training in the gym. Sometimes I'll go to the gym and just throw around a medicine ball for an hour, or kettlebells are great. Do that for a long time. Tire flips, rowing, the list goes on. I'll do lots more videos on this, but for now, just think of like full body movement with a heavy weight, but not too heavy that you can only do it for a few minutes. Pick a comfortable weight that you can do for an hour, and I'll do lots of videos on this a bit later on. Finally, I'll maybe share one source, a little known fact. The Germanic peoples and the Vikings have always been known to be physical specimens, okay? And specifically very powerful for single blows. Today, this has kind of disappeared from our culture in the north of Europe, but really in our genetics, deep within our genetics, we should be very explosive, powerful athletes. Don't think of us like power athletes, like big fat strongmen, like most people think of Scandinavian people today. What we are really actually meant to be is tall, athletic, and very explosive. So maybe basketball players or American football players, but also really would be best in power sports like the javelin throw, discus, shot put, those types of things, and maybe even boxing or kickboxing. So incorporate these types of things into your training as well. Maybe a single, like very powerful, explosive movement. I like best like medicine ball throws, hammer throws, clean and jerks, things like that. And again, I'll do many videos on these coming soon, but this gives you at least some information to start with. So that was a long video, longer than I wanted it to be. This was supposed to be just an intro, but it is just a big subject, and I can speak a lot more of this in other videos, but hope you enjoyed and learned something new in this one at least. Vi ses nästa gång.